Hello listeners, this talk is going to be a response to a question from Jacob Moore that was posted under the 75-25 rule talk, and also a suggestion from Millennial Woes. Now, Jacob Moore's question was, what areas do you recommend investing your money in other than businesses? And Millennial Woes suggested that I could do at least one talk on different amounts of money and what to do with those different amounts of money. So hopefully this will kill two birds with one stone and address both of those people's questions or suggestions. So this talk is specifically going to be what to do with $100 to $1,000. So less than $1,000. Now, Millennial Woes suggested originally that I should do, say, $100, $500, $1,000. The reason why I am grouping all of those together will become apparent as the talk goes on. Before I actually talk about what to invest in, the first thing I should do is talk about what not to invest in, because I think in many ways it's more important not to lose money than to think about making money. If you can protect yourself from losing money, you're already ahead of the game. You only need to make a little bit of money to really get ahead over time if you do that. Warren Buffett says he has two rules. Rule number one is don't lose money. Rule number two is see rule number one. So basically, if you can avoid losing money, you'll be off to a good start. Now, what would I say you don't get invested in? Well, basically anything you don't understand, that's the first thing. So if it's really complex, don't do it, because if you don't understand something, there's a very high chance that you'll find yourself out of your depth and you will end up drowning, so to speak. So basically either do a lot of reading about something or just don't go there, essentially. The other issue I would say is don't invest in anything if there's a possibility that you might need that money within a fairly short time frame. Now, the reason for that is as follows. Let's say, for instance, you said, all right, I'm going to go and invest in the stock market. The stock market over time should generally go up. If you own the market, it will go up over time. Though you'd have to be careful about buying into the top of a market. But nevertheless, you might say, okay, right, so that's a great idea. Everyone always says go and invest in stocks. All right, so you go off and do that, and then you pour all of your spare money into that, and you don't have any other money for anything else. Now, the stock market is very volatile, and it goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down, and so on, up and down, up and down, up and down, all the time, from day to day, week to week, and so on. Now, say you've put all of your money into that, and then you have some sort of emergency, and you need money, and you're looking around and you say, well, I literally don't have any money. Oh, wait a second, I've got this money invested, and then you go, oh, grief, it's all gone down in value, and you have to take that money out anyway because you absolutely need the money at that moment. You take a big loss, and that's bad enough, but then there's the psychological effect. A lot of people end up getting burnt like this. They go and do this kind of thing, and then they say, oh, the stock market, it's a horrible idea, I just lost a lot of money, I'm never going to go and do that ever again. And so they then go to the opposite extreme, and they miss out on the growth that they could have had in the stock market. So basically I would say, if you're going to invest in something like the stock market, which I do think is something that's worth investing in, then you need to be in it for the long haul. You need to basically say that any money you're going to put into that, you're not going to see again for the next 5 years. You have to basically write it off, pretend it doesn't exist anymore, and then come back in 5 years. Now, if you only have a little money, if you're quite poor and you're struggling to save money, you don't have the liberty of just essentially saying, well, I'm going to say goodbye to this amount of money I have in front of me right now for the next 5 years. I'm just going to pretend it doesn't exist. You don't have that liberty. Emergencies come along and so on and so forth. It's not something you can really afford to do. So I would say, ironically, don't invest in the stock market if you only have a very small amount of money and if you need it for other things. And then anything that's really kind of exotic, some people will talk about gold, or they'll talk about all these other things that you can put money into. Again, you have to be really careful about knowing what you're doing, and you have to be careful about speculation and so on. Anything that you think you're going to get rich in, or anything where a lot of people are telling you to do it, they're probably selling their book, talking their book, right? They probably have a vested interest in getting you into that. And, a lot of people get sucked into that and then end up doing their shirt. Any guy who's saying, right, go and buy a ton of gold or something like that, that's probably because he's selling you the gold, right? Now, that's not to say that gold is not a viable option. It's just you have to be very careful about people talking their book. And with things like precious metals, it's very hard to actually determine what they're worth and to predict where they're going to end up in the future. And they don't produce dividends and so on. So basically what you've got is what you've got. It doesn't grow. The price might increase, but it doesn't produce anything. It doesn't grow. So it's purely speculative. Now, people who are gold bugs and so on will say it's not speculative and so on, but it's not going to grow, and so it is speculative. You're basically banking on the price going up rather than it producing stuff and producing dividends, essentially. All right, so with that sort of brief introduction in mind, what I would say the first thing you need to do is to make a budget, and there are two things you need to do there. You need to do what's called paying yourself first. So you need to basically set yourself a savings rate. You need to pay yourself that savings rate first. So if you say, I'm going to, say you earn $1,000 and, say a week, for instance, or a month or whatever, and you say, I'm going to save 10% of that. Every time you get your pay, you take $100 out of that, and that goes towards your savings, and you have to live off the remaining $900. You don't do it the other way around, because if you do it the other way around and you think, well, I'll live first and then I'll save what's left, you won't save that $100. There'll always be things that will sort of tempt you or that will come up, and then you just won't save money like that. So you've got to pay yourself first. There's that. And then, of course, cut back on unnecessary things. Those are the first steps I would do, actually. Make a budget, pay yourself first, and cut back on unnecessary things. Now, from there, I think when you're talking about small amounts of money, even before when I said don't invest in the stock market, I think also because I think with small amounts of money, there are actually higher returns you can get doing some somewhat unconventional things. Now, I'll give you an indication of why that might be. If we look at the returns for the stock market, so if we look at the annual returns, the compounding annual growth rate for the stock market in the US, and I'll give you two figures. One is not adjusted for inflation and the other is adjusted for inflation. The numbers aren't really huge. They're not too bad, but they're not huge. So let me tell you what they are. If you look at ever, so basically this is from the 19th century until now, not adjusted for inflation, the compound annual growth rate has been 9.11%, which is not too bad, but there are things that I'm going to talk about in a moment that could probably yield better than that. If you adjust it for inflation, it's only 6.91%. If you look from 1980, so the 1st of January 1980 until the 31st of December 2014, the unadjusted rate is 11.87, and after adjusting for inflation, it's 8.35%. From 1990 until the end of 2014, it's 9.63 unadjusted, and then 6.94 adjusted for inflation. And then from 2000, the 1st of January 2000 until the end of 2014, it's 4.20, and after adjusting for inflation, it's only 1.91. Now that's because there was basically a big bubble right at the start of that period, and there's a bubble now. Now people have made money off the stock market, but nevertheless, the returns haven't been that good recently if you just owned the market. I think there are ways you can get better returns doing other things, and they're pretty simple things. The first thing I would say you need to do, and it could be any of these things, but probably the first one, the most obvious one, is to pay off any high interest debt you have. Because if you were to invest in the stock market and you got a 9% return, so imagine you had $100 and then you had $109. Well, if you had $100 also on a credit card and you were paying, say, 20%, well, that 20% interest rate is twice what the return would be on your stocks. It would make more sense to pay off that $100 because it's going to accrue an extra $20 of debt for you. So it's better to prevent gaining that extra $20 of debt than getting $9 of growth or dividends or whatever in the stock market. It makes more sense to pay off high interest debt. So look at high interest debt and consider that an investment. If you have high interest debt, pay that off because you're actually going to get a better return, preventing the negative effects of that than gaining the positive effects of investing in the stock market. The next thing I would do is I would create something that I would call a bargains savings fund. So I would start saving money towards this fund, and what I would use that fund for, I'll tell you about in a second. But basically, you don't touch that money for general things. It has to be for special occasions only. And what I would do then with that bargain savings fund is I would start looking at a whole lot of areas in my life where, again, I could buy certain things that would then save me money in terms of consumption down the line. And I would look at each of these different things and see where I would get the greatest returns. I haven't done that here because there's a huge amount of work involved there, so you'd have to do that work. But basically, I have a list of things here. So for instance, the first on my list is buy things in bulk. So of course, you have to be careful that you don't consume more of them. So I would say buy things in bulk that you're not going to use a lot. You're not going to use extra of. Like if you bought a whole lot of chocolate, you're just going to eat extra chocolate, right? So you're not really going to save money by buying extra chocolate because you're just going to eat it, right? But something like, I don't know, toilet paper, for instance, or other things like that you might use around the house, that you're not going to say, well, I've got all these extra laundry detergents or something, so I'm going to wash my clothes twice now. You're not going to do that. But basically, look at things you could buy in bulk and where you could get savings there. Now, those savings may or may not exceed the return you would get in the stock market, for instance, or they may or may not exceed the interest that you would have on high interest debt. But that's something to consider. Look at everything you use and think, could I buy this in bulk? And what sort of savings would I be looking at? You might get pretty good savings, it might be 20%, might be 15%. That's more than you would get in the stock market. So what you could do is take those savings and then add those back into the bargain savings fund and just go down this list that I'm going to continue in a moment. And once you've sort of done everything you can on that list, then move on to the next step, which I will talk about in the next talk after this for larger amounts of money, over $1,000. So, after buying in bulk, you might consider buying clothes out of season, so that you're not buying them when they're really expensive. And also, along those lines, buy gifts out of season for other people, because you could get considerable savings, and then you could put those savings back into the bargain savings fund. And you could consider those savings to be dividends, in effect, similar to what you would get on a stock, right? Those savings would add up, and that amount would increase quite quickly. So buy gifts out of season, those kinds of things. So do your Christmas shopping in July or something like that, or whenever you see something. If you have a bargains fund of a couple of $100, you don't have to then think, I have to do my Christmas shopping in December because I don't have any money before December. So then you're caught in all their marketing and the fact that they put their prices up and play all these funny games with you. if you have a bargain savings fund, you can take advantage of opportunities as they present themselves to you. And that's one of the real things about investing. It's about not being forced to spend money at any one particular time, but basically choosing when you want to spend the money so that you can optimize the spending of that money. So the next thing I have on my list is, again, I don't know to what extent this would necessarily pay off. There would probably be some things that this would work for. For more expensive items, it might be worth buying things that last longer, or just general things actually that might last longer. So, these days you can get any piece of crap that's made in China, and it's relatively cheap, but it's going to break in a short time. If people are sort of aware that things used to be made better in the past. They were built to last, whereas there's a certain built-in obsolescence now in many products. And so you get something that's really cheap, but you find yourself replacing it, every 6 months or every year or something. And, if you just bought one really good thing that lasted 20 years, that would actually work out to be cheaper, even adjusting for inflation and all this sort of stuff, than buying some crappy thing 20 times, basically. So it might be worth building up that bargain savings fund and then finding something that's high quality and buying that and watching the savings steadily accrue over time. Because when you have a low amount of money, you want to sort of see those increments occurring fairly frequently. You can't afford to just sit back and wait for a huge amount of time. So the next thing on my list, what's that? Okay, so this is a slightly unconventional thing. Maybe look at planting some fruit trees and consuming that fruit rather than going out and buying fruit, or doing things like making jam. Now, for the property that we own, we planted a whole lot of fruit trees probably 3 years ago. Some of them we actually bought a year before that, and we had them in pots. So let me think of what we had. We had, I think, about 3 or 4 citrus plants. There are 2 lemon trees. There's another one that's sort of an orange type thing. And then there's another one. I don't know what you call these fruit. They're very small. They're about the size of maybe a marble, something like that. I don't know. They're maybe about almost an inch across. And they're orange. They're really sour, and so we put them in drinks and stuff. And these bushes are always producing tons and tons of lemons and these other little things. I can't remember what they're called. So we paid. I think we paid about $5 for each of those trees. I think that's right. And I'm sure we've got our money's worth from those already within those 3 years, that we've had those. No, 4 actually for the citrus trees. Then we planted some other trees. We had an avocado that died. We had a mango tree, and that was actually doing okay. It had a mango on it as well. And it was doing okay until a builder, when we did some work on our place, a builder ran into it with his truck and basically destroyed the tree. So I wasn't particularly happy about that. So that was a loss also. Then we had something called a custard apple, which is kind of an exotic fruit. They're very expensive to buy. That didn't turn out so well. That died as well. I'm not painting a great picture so far, but then I'll get to the success story. We planted 2 mulberry bushes. One of them didn't do very well at all. We ended up pulling it out. But the other one is absolutely enormous now. We've only had this thing for 3 years. When we bought it, it was sort of knee high. It's now taller than I am, considerably taller than I am, and probably 1.5 times my hand span at least. And a couple of months ago, when the mulberries were in season, we got over 10 kilograms of mulberries just off that tree, and my wife made them into jam. So she had to buy some sugar, of course, to do that. But we have dozens and dozens of jars of jam now, and if you went to the supermarket and bought those jars of jam, they would add up to being a fortune. So even aside from the sugar, the tree cost us $5, and we've probably got, I don't know, a couple of $100 worth of jam out of this tree. And last year we got, I think it was about 3 or 4 kilos. Next year, presumably, it will be more than 10 kilos. So, you might want to look into something like planting fruit trees because they're pretty much no maintenance. If you have a vegetable garden, you have to do a lot of maintenance and so on with that. You have to do weeding and, there are snails and things that come and attack your vegetables. But basically, these fruit trees have been really low maintenance. Oh, we also have a guava tree that's produced a few guavas. Not very many, but it's still produced some guavas. This mulberry bush, the birds tried to get at it. We sort of chased them away. They didn't really get very many of the mulberries. So that's been a really good investment, actually, just in terms of the return. As I said, $5 in, and then I don't know how much the sugar cost. It wasn't very much. And, probably well over $100 worth of jam just this year. So that's an interesting thing you could do. And you could save a lot of money if you had your fruit trees for fruit or for jam or that kind of stuff, and then just consider those savings a dividend and plough that back into the savings fund, and it would sort of snowball quickly like that. The next thing on my list is look at performing some maintenance on your car. Really simple things like changing the air filter, that kind of stuff. You spend a very small amount of money on things like that, but they can really add up in terms of the economy of the car. So that could be something you could do. I mean, you could do that for well under $100. I think an air filter is probably about $10, something like that. And along those lines, look at performing maintenance on your house. And the really interesting one there is air sealing your house. You just get caulk. It's not very expensive to get caulk. Just seal the windows and doors and any little gaps in your attic or something like that, and you will find that you'll save a huge amount on heating or cooling as a result, just by air sealing your house. It doesn't cost very much to do it. You could probably do it for under $100 even. And those savings would add up. You might even make that money back within 1 year. And, if you can basically make your money back within a year, that's a huge return. You're not going to get that kind of money in the stock market, for instance. So again, consider those savings that you would get just from spending that little bit of money as a huge dividend, and plough it back into your sort of savings fund. And another thing you could do is look at installing LED light bulbs. They cost more than normal light bulbs, but they last longer, and you can save money on energy bills and so on. So again, over 3 years or something, you could have considerable savings there. And again, just plough that money back into the fund as a dividend in a way. All of these things are small things you can do, but as I said, you can potentially get much greater returns than you would in the stock market, and the volatility is going to be much lower too. So you're not going to be freaking out if you log into your brokerage account and say, oh my God, I'm down 10% today, or, I'm down 3% or something. Oh my God, I'm losing my money, right? You're not going to have that same effect. It's just going to be sort of drip, 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 and you're going to steadily save money with these kinds of things. So it's a psychological thing, because when you don't have a lot of money, you don't want to think you're losing money. You want to see your money constantly going upwards, even if it's just small amounts each day or each week or each month, but going up, up, up the whole time. It's a real psychological thing. And another thing along those lines might be to install a programmable thermostat. I looked on Amazon for these, and these go for anywhere from $20 up to over $200, but it looks like you can get something that's probably quite adequate for less than $50. So, it's not a huge investment, and yet those savings that you would get on heating or cooling bills could add up quite quickly. You could certainly make your money back on that within a year, probably. So that could be a really good investment as well. And again, treat the savings as a dividend, plough them back into that savings fund, and you'll see this start to accrue really quickly. Some other items along a similar line to LED light bulbs or a programmable thermostat would be perhaps buy a deep freezer. Obviously, you'd have to pay for the electricity on it, but you might still come out in front. Deep freezers are a little bit more expensive. Again, I looked on Amazon, and they looked to be around $200 to $500. You can get sort of super deluxe commercial type models for thousands of dollars, but I don't think you really need those kinds of things. So $200 to $500 if you have a large family, or you want to. If you can go somewhere and buy a whole lot of meat, for instance, on sale, you can store it. Basically, you can actually buy that and get really good value for that. Along those lines I discussed earlier about buying things in bulk. So a deep freezer, even though you'd have to pay more in electricity costs, and actually buying the item, it still might work out quite good. And same story, plough the money from the savings into both from buying those other things in bulk, meat in bulk or something, or bread or I don't know, whatever. Plough those savings into your fund. Again, it will snowball really quickly. And then other things along those lines, buy a slow cooker. They look as though they go for between $20 and $100 on Amazon. So they're pretty cheap, but they're a good way to cook them, and you can set them and then just come back later, and your dinner's done. Do it in the morning, come back in the evening, it's done. So you don't have to spend too much time doing that kind of stuff. And again, you could use that in conjunction with your freezer, your deep freezer. You could make a whole lot of food in your slow cooker and then freeze it in your deep freezer. Pardon me, and you could get really good savings on your food bill as a result. And again, think of that as an investment. Think of those savings as your dividend that you would otherwise get from a share in a company in the stock market. And again, that could add up really quickly. Another thing along those lines, I didn't actually look at the prices for these. I just thought of something, maybe a bread maker as well, something like that. And then the last thing I have here is a surge protector or an automatic power strip. So the surge protector, so these go for about $20 to $40 on Amazon. A surge protector, of course, protects valuable things such as computers and televisions and so on. So they're, I guess, a kind of insurance so that big expensive items wouldn't get damaged. And you can get those also with an automatic system on them, so that you can program them or they turn off when you haven't been using them for a while or whatever, because a lot of those big appliances like computers and televisions can actually do consume a fair bit of energy, and so you can prevent them from doing that. And at $20 to $40 a pop, and most of those seem to have 6 or 8 outlets, so you could plug quite a few things into each of those. You could buy maybe 2 or 3 of those for your house, for $60 to $120, and you could probably get that money back within a year as well. So those are some of my ideas for what to do with under $1,000, because all of those things, the freezer alone is up to $500. All of those things could easily set you back $1,000, maybe even more. So if you pick those off one at a time, you'd have lots to do with up to $1,000. I think as low as a few dollars for less than $10 for an LED light bulb, or a fruit tree or something like that, right up to $500 for a deep freezer or $200 for a thermostat. I don't think you'd need to get the $200 one. That looks a bit excessive, but nevertheless, if you looked at all of those things, you could probably find a way to spend $1,000, and you could probably get that $1,000 back and more within a year or two, I'd say. And that's a huge return. You're not going to get the return, as I said, in the stock market. You're going to get 9%, give or take, basically. Recently it's been a bit bad, and it's kind of a bubble at the moment. I don't know, I wouldn't necessarily just go in and buy the market right at the moment. So those things, I think, would be a better way to invest your money than investing in the stock market at this point, and the psychological effects as well. I think seeing every month that you're comparing last month's power bill to this month's power bill and saying, wow, it's gone down, that's a real psychological thing, rather than logging into your online brokerage account and freaking out because oh my god, I've lost $200 today, right? You haven't really, but there's still that psychological effect, right? So that's pretty much it for the what to do with up to $1,000, how to invest that money talk. I hope you have found this beneficial. Thanks for listening.